All right. How is everyone doing today? Wednesday, as I record this, this is part two of our look at bushcraft in terms of hexcrawling. We will be looking at continue our look at the book Bushcraft 101, which is available currently with the Humble Bundle Bushcraft. I think it's also Bushcraft Survivalist book offering. Hey, Krister, glad you can make it. I thought in the part one, I thought there was some really interesting stuff we learned. At least it was learning for me. Maybe a lot of folks who are already aware of this stuff on setting up camp, the kind of ins and outs of that, the four W's, which I thought was interesting. And so I'm really interested to see what we can learn about navigating terrain. And like with last time, I think there's going to be some stuff that's going to be for our purposes, just kind of flavor. Maybe not anything that we're going to see has enough of a mechanical or that we want to spend time mechanizing, but just that in terms of when we are adding context to things our players are doing or not doing, we have some different ways we can do that. And we might find some things that we want to mechanize. I definitely have something in mind to do with the setting up camp. Um, I think from some of the things that we learned from that last chapter in the book. So let's just get to it. Let's see down there. I'm not sure how long this chapter is, and if there is time at the end, maybe I'll go back and look at because one of the things I didn't cover in the last stream, we started off with just chapter 7, setting up camp. Notice there's a whole other part here on gearing up stuff. We could maybe go back and look at that at the end, but we will begin. We'll begin at the end of the beginning of the end, the prequel, sequel to the middle. Navigating terrain. Knowing where you are is unnecessary. What you need to know is how to get back to where you were. From quoting Don Paul in 1991. I have no idea who Don Paul is, but I think this is key, right? Knowing how to get back to where you were. It's definitely, there was that movie Ronin. I love it's a great, I don't know, I feel like an underrated, really great movie, but at one point, it's one of the last, I think, the kind of later, really good Robert De Niro movies. But his character is asking, basically, they're setting up this whole operation, and what Robert De Niro wants to know is, well, how do you get out of there? Like, yeah, how do you get back? And that for him was a very important question, whereas everyone else is acting like they're above asking about such things. But he wants to live, so he wants to know how he can get back. Navigation is an underrated skill for any woodsman. Even finding your way back to camp from a short scout should always be managed with some verification method in case you get turned around. And apologies, but I'm just going to highlight stuff for my own amusement as we go. Not only is it important to understand all aspects of map and compass, but you must also develop a sense of direction and travel by paying close attention to where you have been and where you are going. Learning terrain feature association and using handrails will assist you greatly when traveling short distances, but for making long treks, the map and compass are the keys to success. I don't know what a handrail is. I suppose we will learn that eventually. In terms of a fantasy game, I don't know that I have compasses in my game. Not that they don't necessarily exist, but I don't think my players have ever gotten a hold of one. I've never introduced one. But I assume that in your kind of ye old medieval fantasy thing, the compass has already been discovered, right? I think that's something that what the ancient Greeks, I imagine, did, or the maybe one of the Near Eastern, Mesopotamia based civilizations discovered. Am I wrong about that? And this is watered down apple juice for the working man. Am I wrong? Hey, Terrence, let me know if I'm wrong, if the compass is something more recent than all that. Well, what does Bushcraft have to say about compasses? Not all compasses are created equal, and there are many types on the market today. I've always made sure that every piece of equipment I carry is both optimal for its intended use and multifunctional. The compass is no different. Your compass should act as a navigational device, signaling device for emergencies, mirror used for first aid as well as daily hygiene, and a tool capable of fire starting by solar ignition. Okay, so here's something we probably have to take with a grain of salt, given, not that he's wrong, but given that if we are using these for kind of our medieval fantasy things, that we're probably dealing with our compass that's very, very simple and isn't multi-purpose. Though, of course, you could use these things if you wanted to come up with an interesting magical item type compass, or maybe an over-engineered gnomish or dwarven compass, then maybe having some of these things built in somehow would make it interesting. With these functions in mind, you can begin to picture the type of compass you should choose. You want a base plate compass made for map reading. Okay. This compass has a flat plate, usually made from plastic, that can be laid on the map and is transparent for use in conjunction with mapping and factoring routes on a map with your compass. It also has a movable bezel ring that rotates on the compass on which degree readings are marked, preferably with glow-in-the-dark paint. All right, so this stuff, these things are very modern. These are some modern conveniences that our party is not likely to have, though, again, you could make kind of magical, steampunky versions of these. Make sure the compass has a mirror, okay, as well as a magnifying glass. Spend money to buy a good one. Always a good point. Don't cheap out on the stuff that's gonna be potentially between you and dying out in some horrid wilderness. Why carry a compass? The answer to this is not as obvious as it sounds. General direction finding does not require a compass. Oh, Parent says Han Dynasty. Okay, so yeah, it is old school. I'll have to look up. Maybe I'll have to look up what a compass from the Han Dynasty looked like. So why carry a compass? The answer to this is not as obvious as it sounds. General direction finding does not require a compass. In fact, on sunny days, you are your own shadow stick. In the northern hemisphere, if you are facing the sun, you are looking in a southerly direction. Southeast in the morning, southwest in the evening, and generally south during the zenith hours from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The most important reason to carry a compass is so that we can walk in a straight line over distance. This is definitely a key point that I think, man, I was just actually thinking about doing something about this. And I've mentioned this multiple times, many times, especially when talking about hex maps. And I think sometimes the frustration or with the kind of directionality, depending on how your hexes are lined up, that there's not a perfectly either east-west move, because then you're on the lines, which I don't think is really a big deal, but I think some people will get troubled if they feel like they're having to pick south, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest kind of thing, instead of just being able to move straight across. What I often mention is that the straight line bit, it's like you're thinking that you're moving as a crow flies and that crow is flying in a absolutely straight line. But you can it's very hard to do that in terrain, especially if it's woods or hills or anything like that, is you're constantly moving around stuff, zigzagging around different obstacles, trying to make use of natural trails and things you find. You're not moving in the straight line, so you can't pinpoint precisely. But this thing with the compass is, and obviously you can play around with how accurate your compass is or how accurate you can measure, whatever. But the idea with the compass is, as a tool, is that, yes, like he was saying, you can usually, depending on weather and whatnot, you can get a pretty good sense of the general direction you're going, but you're trying to stay true to a particular direction, and a compass helps you be accurate. Everyone experiences what is called lateral drift, which causes us to gradually move left or right over long distances when walking. If you can see an object, you can easily walk straight toward it. However, if you go down a hill or an obstruction blocked your view of your intended destination, you will no longer walk the same straight line. This is why you carry a compass. Basic compass use. Beyond determining direction, the basic use of the compass is to establish a bearing. I'm just going to highlight that if it lets me, and it will. Your compass has the movable bezel ring with degree readings. You will be able to perform this task. Most compasses have a needle that is two different colors, usually white/white, or red/white, or orange/white. The white side of the needle points south, and the colored area points north. The front, quote-unquote, front, or quote-unquote top of the compass is where the mirror is. If you open the compass and look in the mirror, your compass is pointed to the front. Under the bezel ring of the compass should be an outlined arrow or set of arrows that move as the bezel ring is moved. This is important because you use the plug in a visual bearing. So that's a bit more on the complex modern side. But the idea here, again, is that you want to get a bearing. You need to be going a certain direction. The compass gets you on that direction. Whereas if you're just following the sun, the angle of, the amount of error you're going to get in anything. If you really need to go, you feel like specifically northwest in a specific small band, that's really hard to do if you're just looking at the sun. You can kind of get into a okay, I'm going to be in that general northwesterly direction, but you're going to have a large amount of error in there. With a compass, you can really hone in. And of course, as this is a modern book talking about modern survival and modern bushcraft, they're talking about modern compasses, but I think even a Han Dynasty compass or something a lot more primitive will get you a lot closer to a true bearing than you would have just trying to eyeball the sun and then walking. And then, of course, if you do get clouds or tree cover, other things that obstruct being able to see the sun with any accuracy, then it's even worse. Taking and following a bearing. Once you understand the component parts of the compass, taking a visual bearing and following it is easy. Use the sighting device on your compass lid. This usually looks like a V gun sight to aim at a distant object. Hold the compass centered on your body with arms stretched partway out in front of you, away from your body. Tilt the mirror enough that you can see both the object in the distance through the V and the bezel ring on your compass. The needle in your compass will always point north. So at this point, move your bezel ring so that the outline or doghouse lines up in such a way that the north needle is inside. You will then have the bearing at the top of your compass. At this point, if you lower your compass and keep the north needle within the line of the bezel ring as you walk, you'll be walking in a straight line or exact bearing. So here and I do like that they have a modern compass, so we can get kind of the idea, because it's a lot of terms, and I'm guessing that if we were able to pull up what a medieval compass looks like, we would not get this. But, and I wonder if I'll do that in different windows, because I would be curious just to see it. But what we can see from this is that you're lining up, you're figuring out basically, so the compass always points north. That would be number one. So you're going to do is you're going to find out when you're looking at the thing you're trying to get to. You're looking at the thing you're trying to get to. Where is north pointing? You can see here on the image, we have north-south pointed a certain way. Then we know, once we have that, and we can kind of use the bezel or some kind of marking on there, say, okay, we know that north needs to be here, so that we now know that to keep walking and be going straight, even if we can't see where we're going, we know that if the compass is pointed in that direction that matches up with what we've just cited, we know we're walking towards it, even if we can't see it. Does that make sense? I may have made it less clear in the text, right? But essentially, the thing's always pointed north. You find out whatever that it's pointing at when you're turned to face your thing. You make, if it's pointed, whatever, this kind of direction, you make sure that as you're moving, that's continually pointed in that direction. You're walking in the line you need to be walking. That's the bottom line, son. All right, here, I'm going to drag this over. Let's take a look at it quick. So here we can see, I don't know if these are accurate or not. It's a museum. I don't know. Does any one of these seem more accurate? What is this one? Let's just say we have got something like this, which has a fixed bezel. So here, knowing if we were pointing this straight ahead, we'd know we'd want to keep. What is that? 350, or I don't know, whatever that number would be, or that's 0, I guess. We want to keep it there. We keep moving ahead. We go to where we want to. Oops. I pulled up Discord with some Midjourney stuff. I haven't forgotten about Midjourney. I still do tons of Midjourneying, but that's not what we're here for today. Okay. Leapfrog for long distance travel. Trying to watch the compass as you walk may not be safe, in which case you'll need to leapfrog. To do this, you will use the bearing you just plugged into sight on an object closer to you, toward which you can walk without losing sight of it. Once you reach the object, you pick another point on the same bearing and walk to it, and so on until you get where you wanted to go. If you are given a bearing to follow, or you have checked your map to get a bearing, you can place that degree reading at the top of the compass and rotate your body until the needle is in the doghouse. At that point, you are facing the direction of the bearing, and you can proceed either in continuous movement or by leapfrogging. So in this case, we don't have, you may be trying to get somewhere. You don't have a direct bearing on that, but you have direct bearings on things that are basically lined up in the same direction along that path. So you keep going from point to point, which will then lead you on to the main point. I think the interesting thing here with this, which is only one use of the compass, this idea of doing the bearing, is that these are all things you can see. These are not things that are out of sight. That's when we're going to have to be using a map. And it's going to be interesting to think about, and I don't know if they'll even get into it here, if you're trying to get towards stuff that you cannot see and you do not have a map. Oftentimes in Hexcrawling, the party may not, depending on the everything going on, oftentimes may not have a map at all. They may just have a general sense of where the thing is. They may, they just know, okay, it's in the wood, not where in the wood, or it's whatever, right? So they're moving kind of over long distances without a map. And it seems pretty clear that even with a compass, you can use leapfrogging, you can use all these stuff, but those are towards moving things that assuming you want to go that way. You find something, you want to go there, you use the compass to make sure you're kind of on the right track. But it's probably even a whole other thing of what if you don't know what you don't know, or you don't know exactly where you're going. You don't have even that map part. I don't know if we'll get into that. If they'll do something like you might do if you're one of those Bear Grylls or Survivor Man series where you're if you're somewhere and you need to kind of get somewhere, but you only have vague ideas of where that is, how you're supposed to navigate there. But I thought that was interesting. This is really something I never considered. What if you don't have a particular landmark ultimately to get to? What do you do? So that was leapfrogging, and then we did kind of direct traveling on bearings. Understanding terrain features and maps. Remember that a topographic map is a two-dimensional image of a three-dimensional surface. So if you understand what you were looking at on the map, you can visualize what it looks like in real life. Here we'll discuss the 5 most prominent colors and 5 most useful terrain features on any topographic map. So this will be interesting too, but I'm imagining, most times players, even GMs, aren't going to have topographical maps that they're handing out. So this may be more in the flavor, or you might think of this as things you could use to prep your own maps if you wanted to build some of this in. Think about using these colors, using these tools that they're going to be talking about. So the 5 colors are brown. This is used for contour lines. These lines show elevation. Generally, contour lines are in increments of 20 feet. If you can find an elevation level written on a line near a hilltop, this will help determine the contour level. For example, if a contour line is 800 feet, then 5 lines above that will be 900 feet, and 5 lines below will be 700 feet. Green is used for vegetation. Generally, the darker the green, the more dense the vegetation. Blue is used for water sources, creeks, streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, and so on. Black is generally a man-made object of some sort, such as a trail, a railway, or a building, and then red shows major roadways, such as highways. So if you're making your own maps, this could be pretty useful to you, because once you get used to this color scheme, just with the colors, you can really quickly get a handle on what's going on. So if you like to use more of a top-down approach as opposed to the more artistic, some kind of isometric view or hex symbols, use those. Use your brown lines for contours. Use green for your vegetation, blue for water. It really makes a lot of sense, and it'll be easy for you to pick out. The 5 terrain features. Hilltops are the highest points of elevation in a rise, offering opportunities to overlook. A ridge line is a series of hilltops. These areas will enable high ground travel. Animals use them for the same purpose. A saddle is a low area between 2 hilltops. These areas offer good windbreak for camps without sacrificing elevation. Hilltops and ridges drain through saddles into valleys below. A draw is the reduction in elevation from a saddle with high ground on both sides. This is usually a good runoff point for water, and in many cases leads to a valley. A valley is a low elevation running between ridgelines. These areas hold runoff and are the best places to look for unmarked streams. If they hold water, the higher ground above them will be excellent for ambushing game that goes to the water to drink. Most valleys are also good trapping locations. So the interesting thing here is in terms of hex maps, really in a hex map, the only thing that we really think about are the hilltops, which you're using your hill icon for. But I think it is interesting to think of these other parts, probably only if you're zooming in. I wouldn't suggest doing this for your kind of province-sized map, but if you were drilling down into more of a 1 mile hex or something, kind of like a smaller size, you may want to expand on a particular hilltop and show some of these things, especially if you feel like your party is going to be there for a while, because they'll be returning these locations, and you can start to think about, especially when we looked at the last one in terms of all these things for camping, what are good spots and for prolonged camps. These are the kind of things you're going to be looking for. And even if you don't do any of these things, being able to describe to your party where either if there's someone with good wilderness experience or they have an NPC there, might take them to some spots and use to kind of illustrate, here are the good things about this. Okay, we're on this ridge line where we found one of these saddle areas. It's got water. It's got good water because water's draining from the ridges and the hills into this saddle that then maybe goes in the valley. You could just to have it just to talk about might be useful. Certainly, I know I'm going to incorporate reading other map details. Once you can read the basic features of the map, you need to understand the other information that it can provide. The map can give you distance from one point to another, as well as show you the differences between what your compass is reading, called magnetic north, and what the map is laid out, called grid north. This information will be important if you plan to travel using your map to obtain bearings. The map scale is a reference, usually at the bottom of the map, that tells you how many inches on the map equal a certain distance on the ground. Maps are scaled in numbers like 1 to 10,000. This means that 1 inch on the map represents 10,000 feet. No, 10,000 inches, not feet. 1 inch on the map represents 10,000 inches on the ground. The scale bar on the map makes this easier for you by showing you a measuring device broken into inches or centimeters so you can accurately measure with a ruler and convert that to distance. It is also important that you decide whether you're going to work with the US system of measurement or the metric system when making calculations. Most of the examples I used in this book are in metric system, as I find everything divided by tens to be easy math. Next up, orienting the map. For rudimentary navigation, you do not need to worry much about the declination differences between grid north and magnetic north. However, if you are trying to be very precise over distance and intend to take your bearings from the map, you will need to understand this process. Frederick says, damn, metrics. Indeed. Your map contains a declination diagram, which will show you the amount of offset left or right between magnetic north and map north. So these are the things that probably, again, in your typical, I'm guessing, medieval maps, you're not going to have this stuff. They were not very well defined. I mean, they don't have topographic things anyway. However, so you could probably hand wave away the distance. And plus, in your fantasy medieval world, there might be no difference between true north and the north, whatever, magnetic north and what do they call it? Grid north. I would probably just hand wave that away a bit. The top of any map is oriented north. Think of straight up on the map as corresponding to the hands of the clock pointing at 12. Magnetic north is usually left or right of 12 o'clock, depending on where you're standing on the Earth's surface. Your compass always points to magnetic north, but the map is made to linear and lateral directions, so north on the map is not magnetic north. This difference is indicated on the declination diagram as a degree of offset. Once you find the declination diagram, you can do one of two things. Set the declination difference in your compass if it has adjustable declination, or use the calculation based on the degree of offset on every bearing you take for the map when planning your route. And again, I probably wouldn't do this in my game. Christopher says, you only think that because you don't know how to compare because of your silly measuring system. Oh. That's a response to Frederick Ork, who I didn't quote, says, feet and stones are the proper measurement. And Krister saying, yeah, you just haven't seen a better one. True enough, Krister. I mean, I'm used to feet, not so much stones, but definitely feet. But yeah, I would be fine going to metrics. Definitely divisions of 10 is easier than divisions of 12. Frederick Ork says they use maps from old maps online for their Arcanum game. I mean, I love to find old maps. I don't end up using them. I just try to copy them to do the things that I want on my map, but in that style, if that makes sense. Orienting the map is important if you want to match the two-dimensional image to what you're seeing in the landscape before you. By the way, some interesting things you could do with this. So I'm just going to say that probably in my game, at least, I'm not going to have the players do any kind of declinations and saying, oh, but you're looking at magnetic north rather than grid north. I'm not going to do that. However, what I could do is if I was handing them a prop of a map, I might play around with what side is north. There might be some interesting things with, say, certain cults, certain people, a way of ciphering a map, if you will, to have what north is on the map not be just holding it straight up. In an environment, in a world where maps are probably extremely valuable, extremely important, and they obviously lead and list things on there that you might want to keep secret. One of the ways you can kind of add a cipher to your map is messing around with which way is north. Because if you're holding it and just say, for an easy example, actually the bottom is north and top is south, that might throw people off in a certain way when they're trying to look at features because they're totally looking at it the wrong way. Something like that. And then, of course, you get even trickier with that. So that might be a thing I would look at if I had, especially if there might be a thematic influence You know, like the southern whatever, the people who worship the demon of the south, maybe they would have south being the main orientation and not north. Or maybe they do something else. Krister says, feet are for walking, not measuring. True enough. To orient the map, place your compass fully open on one corner so the straight edge of your compass and the grid lines on the map are parallel. If you are using this map to figure a route and to factor travel bearings, to start this operation, you will need to either have the declination difference set on the compass or offset your bezel ring that amount from 360 degrees at the top of the compass. When you've done this, rotate the map until the north needle is again in the doghouse. The map will be oriented to the terrain in front of you. Make sure that when you begin this process, your map compass is toward the top of the map. So we got a nice little detail. Probably wouldn't come into it, but it is a nice detail. So here we've got a black and white topographical map showing several mountains. Looks like a river flowing below. And then we show the map, the compass with that showing the bearing and orienting the compass. Using also showing the grid lines, having the grid kind of line up so that you can mark the compass. Pomponius Mella's map is one you hand players and their jaw drops. Pomponius Mella map. I'm going to look at that real quick. What does Pomponius Mella map look like? Let's see. I'm going to call you out on this, Frederick. If it's not amazing, I'm going to ask for my money back. So which one of these is the one that's supposed to make my jaw drop? I mean, they are cool. Africa, Europa, Asia, all in a nice circle. There's another one. So nice and neat. A lot of ocean. Okay, measuring distance and taking bearings. Once you have found the scale on the map, you can use any device for measuring, from a string with knots tied in it to a piece of paper with tick marks the same distance as the scale. Laying this object between point A and B, you can calculate the distance to be traveled. Taking a bearing or azimuth from the map. Once the map is properly oriented, you can use your compass to take bearings or azimuths from the map. Azimuth and bearing are fairly synonymous words, meaning the direction to travel. To do this, do not move the map. Lay your compass with the straight edge between the point where you are and the point you want to get to. Then rotate the bezel ring until the needle's in the doghouse. The bearing at the top of the compass will be your travel bearing. Cool. Whoops. So we have 5 navigation methods every woodsman should know. Everyone. Handrails. Here we go. I was curious what a handrail was. So handrails are linear objects within the terrain you can use as a guideline to follow when they lead in the intended direction of travel. Aha. So a creek bed, ridgeline, river, or roadbed can all serve this function to help you navigate to a location without following a compass bearing. So this one is a good one to keep in mind, because one of the things that comes up that is a struggle, I won't say a frustration necessarily, but a struggle, a problem, an issue, is this, especially when if you're using the OSR, you're just rolling dice to get lost, is this conflict you have between the mechanic saying, okay, roll to see if they're lost, and the fictional reality, the fiction, what the players are thinking with, how can we get lost here? And I didn't have this word handrail in my vocabulary until right now, so I'm glad to learn it. Today I learned, kind of thing. But a handrail is one way you can look at is how, if you want to think about mitigating them making a check, is there a handrail? Because I've often talked about, can they follow? You're going to the Lonely Mountain, you can see the Lonely Mountain in front of you. You can get a little bit lost, but how lost can you get? Because you're just pointing yourself at the Lonely Mountain. Or you're following a river, you're following these kind of landmarks. I didn't have this term handrail for it, but it does limit or eliminate in some ways at least some of the getting lost. You might not know how far you're going, whatever, but you're not going to suddenly turn around because you just know I need to keep a river to my left. If the river's always to my left, I can only get so lost. I mean, I'm following the river. I may not I may not know how close I am to my destination. I may not know a whole bunch of other stuff, but I know that I didn't turn around and go a wildly different direction because I always kept the river to my left. Now we know what that's called, handrailing. If you can keep a ridge line, you can keep maybe a forest, the border of a forest or a river or something. If you can picture it like you have that handrail, you have your grip on the handrail, then that kind of keeps you steadied. So something to think about. I always think, look, if they have a reasonable handrail and it doesn't make sense, they get lost, then either mitigate the how lost they can get in terms of how far off course they can go, or you just don't roll, right? But it's nice to know the language that goes along with that. And now I know it's a handrail. John Zidek, apologies if I butchered your last name, says, great topic, need a ranger and or druid in the group. Always can have a ranger or druid. And yeah, certainly that's a way, especially if you're playing an OSR game where they don't necessarily give you a lot of out-of-the-box mechanics. I would totally lean into the fact that your character is an outdoors person kind of class. You're going to have some of the stuff up. Frederick says, like Bilbo climbing the tree. Yeah, that's kind of him taking that sighting, right? You got to climb up over the tree, over the woods, so you can look and see which way Lonely Mountain is. Absolutely. So now we have the next one. So we had handrails. Now we have backstops. Backstops are a point you should not go beyond. These are generally linear land features that run perpendicular to your intended destination. Oh, that's a good one too. So a backstop will be a linear feature. So if you know you need to get to you know that the thing you're supposed to be looking for is in the foothills to the Himalayas. If you look and you're on the slopes of the Himalayas, you know you've gone too far, right? It's a linear feature. It's going to cut across where you're trying to get to. You know, okay, if I hit there, like if I hit the ocean, I was trying to find this town that's by the water. If I find myself staring into the ocean, I know I've gone past the town, unless the town is sank underneath the waves like Atlantis. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Awesome. Thanks. And then Frederick Work mentions the Polynesian navigation with the bird/star compass. I will Google that. A backstop could be a river, stream, roadbed, or railway. It need not be right on top of the intended destination, but it should be close enough that you'll know if you hit that feature that you've passed your mark. This is also a good thing for the party to keep in mind. I would definitely encourage my party to game out what a backstop. Because then, again, it gives them a way of mitigating getting lost. If we're trying to get to the swamps, we know the swamps, or let's say we're trying to get to this thing, and we know it's between the forest and the swamps, whatever, keeping in mind, at least in our mind, that if we're in the swamps, we've gone too far. When I start, say, narrating that they're starting to get into the swamps, I don't necessarily, they should be keeping in mind, oh, wait a minute, the swamps are beyond where we're supposed to get to. Because we know, we know, or we assume that there aren't swamps before our destination, only on the far side. That's our backstop. A baseline. Baselines are the opposite of backstops. These are used for returning to where you started from and should run perpendicular to a campsite or base camp. When you've arrived at the baseline, you should understand which way to get back to camp without having to be precisely accurate with a compass bearing. Good to know also. Another thing you could add into that, features of planning out your campsite as to why you might want to spend some time doing it is to have these kinds of navigational points. So if you're in a saddle, you know that there's that ridge that you're up against. And so because you've kind of spec'd it out, you know that if you come to some part of that ridge and you're anywhere near your campsite, you'll have a good idea of like, oh yeah, I know where this is. This leads us, now we got to go this way to get to camp. Aiming off is usually done in conjunction with a baseline. You will purposely take a bearing left or right of the intended destination a few degrees so that you know on arrival to turn left or right to arrive at the desired location. That's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. I'm kind of curious as to why one would do that. Interesting nonetheless. And then finally, panic azimuths are created so if you get lost, you have a bearing to immediately plug into your compass that will take you to a known point. Probably not going to have that. It'd be interesting how you would do that in your fantasy medieval campaign, but let's see their example is, for instance, say you're traveling north and off to the east is a river that is not part of your intended travel route and is not a handrail. However, if you get lost, you know that a direct west azimuth from the river will take you back towards your intended course. From there, you can use that as a baseline to get to your bearing for travel again or get you back back on track. So it's kind of like, it's not a handrail. You're not really using it for that, but you know that it's there and that you can get back there if you're in trouble. Another good thing to think about for the party, either to work it in mechanically or to give them some, again, just some flavor. It's another thing that if you're having a specialist NPC or your ranger, your druid, somebody with some outdoor survivalist capabilities, if there are situations where people are getting lost, that can be something you can talk to. Well, you have set this up because you did these things, Ranger, because you spent 3 hours planning out these things. You're able to give people this, panic route, so that you could give to all the party. You come back and you tell the party members, hey, everybody, if you get lost around here, there's a river so far away we can't see it, so it doesn't make a good handrail, but I know that's there. And then if you go from there, you can come back. Should be able to reorient yourself on that. Good idea. Reverse or back azimuths. Sooner or later, when traveling by compass, you will stray off course. When this happens, you should attempt a reverse azimuth to return to the last known point. A reverse azimuth just means traveling 180 degrees in the opposite direction from, I just want to highlight this real quick before I complete that thought. Traveling 180 degrees in the opposite direction from where you were going. The easiest method is simply to look at your compass as if it were a clock. If your current bearing is 12 o'clock, rotate the bezel to the 6 o'clock number and you have the reverse azimuth. It says, it's not a handrail, it's a parachute. Yeah, exactly. Determining distance when traveling. An important thing to realize is not only how far you have to travel, but also how far you have traveled already. It is great to look at a map and break out a measuring device and know your destination is 2.5 kilometers, 2.5 clicks east of you. But how do you know how far you have walked once you're on the way? Pace beads are the answer to this question. These are used to measure distance traveled. I think those are the ranger beads, maybe that Frederick Ork mentioned in the chat earlier. To use them, create 2 strings of beads, 1 strand of 9 beads, and 1 strand of 4 beads. These are used to count 5 kilometers. Each bead on the side with 9 beads represents 100 meters, and each bead on the side with 4 beads represents 1 kilometer. You start with all the beads at the top of the 2 strings and drop beads accordingly as you travel in 100-meter increments. The key to this is figuring out how many paces it takes to walk 100 meters. To figure your pace count, or how many paces it takes for you to travel 100 meters over land, you must consider several factors. You should have a journal in which you keep personal notes for use in around camp. Within this notebook, you should record your pace counts. Check your pace in all terrains and always with the gear you intend to carry. Record your pace for flat terrain, uphill, downhill, uneven ground, etc. This way you can average when needed for multiple terrains. Your pace counts are figured in full paces, so if you step off with your left foot, your count will be on every strike of your right foot. I mean, this is, again, probably not going to be something we're going to run into with our fantasy games because they just don't have these accurate kind of maps. Unless your party is going to have accurate maps, these kind of more modern compasses, they're not going to have a good way of figuring all this stuff out, which is good for you as a GM because it gives you some wiggle room on distances and times and stuff. However, if at some point they're able to figure it out, or you end up giving them enough magical or steampunky style, whatever gadgets to be able to figure it out, then maybe you could have the ranger use some kind of beads to figure out this stuff. But for us, it's probably a little bit overkill, but I still find it's interesting to read about because maybe your party comes up with a way to do this kind of on a pseudo level to kind of give themselves a better idea, which would make sense. I mean, they could find a course that's like a mile course and try to do, or however many meters and kilometers, and try to figure out somewhat of a rough pace. It won't be perfect because like this thing is saying, book is saying you should have a notebook where on all these different terrains, where you figure out your pace counts, and that wouldn't be it. But they may want to get kind of a better idea. But probably overkill, but interesting nonetheless. Finding yourself, parenthetically, self-mapping. Some folks assume that having a map and a compass will keep them found. However, if you don't keep track of where you are and wind up lost, it can be very difficult to figure out where on the map you are. If you can find even one identifiable feature that is on the map, you may be able to complete resection to find where you are. Look from high ground at 2 different features on the map. Maybe you have found a fire tower and you can see 2 hilltops from where you stand. If this tower is the only one on the map, you're all set. But to verify this, it would be good to do resection from the tower. Take a bearing on the objects you can see from where you are standing and use the reverse azimuth to draw lines on the map. If these lines intersect at the fire tower, in this case from the two hilltops, you have verified your suspicions that the tower is the one you can see on the map. This sounds easy in this example, but in deep woods or summer growth, it can be nearly impossible. So best to watch the map from the start and navigate by all the methods listed here to stay aware of your current location. So basically you can, I hadn't heard this term resection, but essentially you're essentially trying to triangulate your position so that you can, figure out where you are. You got two objects and yourself, you've got that triangle. And like he's saying, it's supremely difficult. So if you wanted to have your party wants to do this, I think one of the things that happens, which is also the problem that can happen when you're getting lost, is that the party just goes, oh, well, we just remeasure where we are. And then as a GM, you kind of go, I guess. Then you either roll some dice or you do something else. If you're like me and you want to attach some time to it, and they may balk at like 2 or 3 hours to do this, what are you, nuts? You can talk about this stuff. Well, you're in deep woods. You're going to have to do like Frederick Org mentioned what Bilbo did. And you have to try to find a tree that gets you over. Not only does it get you out of above the tree line, but then maybe you have to make sure it can find something else. Like in Bilbo's case, he could see the Lonely Mountain from the trees. Or at least he had kind of 2 points, and you could see that's all he needed to know was the Lonely Mountain's there and where the edge of the woods is. But in other cases, like in this example, you're trying to find a second point. Excuse me. This is why it takes some time. This is why you can start to say, okay, if you're going to take all the time, let's say a 3-hour shift to do this, it'll give you so much chance. Or if you're going to shortcut it and do it faster, you will, but you have more of a chance of error. And when they're asking you why does it take a long time? Why do we got to do this? So that you can come back and use this as that context where here's what you're trying to do. Because remember, in the game, with almost everything we're doing, pretty much everything we're doing is some level of abstraction. And so this saying, hey, we just want to get a bearing, just sounds really simple. But especially because I've never tried to do this stuff in real life, I have no idea what goes into it. Underneath this simple statement is potentially a lot of steps and a lot of complications. And this is assuming you've got a map and you're not trying to do more of kind of in your head thing. And did we hear about that? This was that, all that even more complicated stuff is, hey, this is what you need to do to figure it out. So if you want to do it right, you have to at least bake in this amount of time. If you want to try to be fast, you're going to have to give up some accuracy or, something. Frederick Ork says they could leave a magic breadcrumb trail. They could, or if they're Hansel and Gretel or whatever, just leave real breadcrumbs. Just hope that there aren't bread-eating animals in the forest. Frederick Ork also says that in Shadowrun and Earth Dawn, a mage could just go astral and zip ahead and back in half a minute. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, there's always that point, right, where some of the things that magic users in particular get a hold of, and or sometimes it's a class feature that comes up that kind of just says, well, we can no longer get lost. But, I like to try to make that stuff interesting too. Maybe not a high degree, but there are things that live on the astral plane. So if you just take to zipping along all the time, you might draw some attention from other things that happen to be hanging out in the astral plane. But yes, there are always going to be those, but the potential anyway of some ability, class feature, magic item that's going to kind of make some of the stuff a non-issue. So this is resectioning. So here it's got the compass laying them out in 2 directions to try to figure out where they are. There's a bushcraft tip here. Here's a funny story that demonstrates just how easily folks get lost. I was in the woods one cold winter morning less than 200 yards from a main road where my vehicle was parked. After about 30 minutes, I heard another vehicle drive up and park in close proximity to my own. I began to hear a crunch of snow coming from behind me. It did not sound like a deer, but more like a human. As I sat in my stand, I watched a hunter walk past me. He walked about 50 yards and stopped, looked around, turned left, walked a few steps, and then he stopped and looked around again. After a couple of minutes, he walked a few yards back to the right. At this point, he began looking around him as though he was not sure exactly where he was. Mind you, he was only 200 yards from a main road. After about 10 minutes of wandering in what looked like small circles from my perch in the tree, he sat down by a tree, and I could tell he was not hunting. He was visibly fidgeting with his gear and acting like he was a bit nervous. After a few minutes, he began to walk again, but this time I coughed so as not to scare him too bad by calling out. When he looked in my direction, I simply said, "Your car's behind me about 200 yards. He replied, "I knew that," and walked off abruptly. Upon seeing my car, he should have known when he entered the woods that someone else might be about. From his behavior, I am certain he was lost within 200 yards of his car, in areas with lots of features that all look the same, like trees, one can become disoriented quickly. You should always take a bearing from where you start to at least know the direction to return. Another really good point I just went through saying about, hey, these reasons why you should mitigate your getting lost rolls, but here's another reason why you can still look at getting lost as something that can fundamentally happen quite often. Here's a guy, and I would even have said in this example, could he not see his other footprints? Like, he walked out of the woods, but maybe those, because he came in, he walked, presumably crunching through snow, out into a clearing, flying, he's going left, right, didn't even just see where he's going. But the point is that you can get disoriented even if you're not very far. And that's something that I think people might think on the surface of it, but I'm so close, how could I get lost? You can, especially things like woods, and especially if you don't take care. And when your party may be trying to decide whether they're going to move quickly or move with care, you could say that if you're moving with care, you're going to make sure that you have these things like they mentioned. Oh, have that bearing, have that handrail, all that stuff set up. If you start moving quickly or carelessly, then those are the things that end up falling by the wayside. And that's when you might get lost when you least expect it, even if you're fairly close to where you were coming from or where you were going or whatever. You can still get lost. Obstacles. You may encounter many obstacles during your tramps, and you may have to either circumnavigate them or cross them. Circumnavigation of an object, such as a lake or pond, is pretty simple. You can choose to do one of two things depending on the situation. Find an easily identifiable object on the far side, if you can see that far, that is in the same line as the bearing you are traveling. Walk around and take another bearing from that object. So in this case, you're basically doing that, what did they call it? Leapfrogging. So you have a pond or some kind of obstacle. You see there's a particular tree or some kind of stone, something you recognize or you think you'll remember. You can keep that, walk around the perimeter, you get to that point again, then you can take the bearing, from that object again. If you cannot see the other side of the obstacle, or there's no reliable way to identify something on the other side, then you'll need to 90-90-90. With this method, you will use your pace count. Stop at the edge of the obstacle, turn left or right, 90 degrees, and pace count until you get beyond the obstacle. Then turn 90 degrees forward and walk until you have avoided the obstacle. If you are pace counting for distance, this leg needs to be recorded. Now turn 90 degrees in the opposite direction, walk the same number of paces you did on the first leg, creating a three-sided box. This will bring you back to the bearing you were on before encountering the obstacle. So the idea here is you can't see the other side of it. Say it's a lake, something large, or there's mist or something, you can't get it. So you're going to go out, you're going to turn, you're facing a certain direction. You're going to pivot your body exactly 90 degrees, and hopefully you'll be able to walk pretty straight that 90 degrees. Then you're going to, for some distance, and you're going to pivot back, walk straight for some other distance, and then you're going to pivot again and walk. And if you've been able to stay on point, you figure you should come out more or less where you were. Might need to take more bearings and whatnot. Obviously, it seems like it would work best with a pace count. You could probably do it without a pace count, but I imagine there's much more likelihood you're going to get, or it's not going to be as precise. You could probably also use your compass, figure out like, okay, 90 degrees is this bearing, so I'm going to keep walking, then I'm going to turn. That would probably help as well. And it also kind of assumes you're going to be able to work 90 degrees. So here they show. So you have the bearing 315. You're going to add 90 degrees. They're going to have 45. They're going to truck over that way. Then they're going to go back. 15, boom, truck back, boom, boom. So use your compass, kind of do that. And of course, you need the compass because, again, just because in this example shows very straight lines with obstacles and things, you may need to do a little wiggly waggly. Wiggly wiggly, waggly waggly. If you must cross an obstacle, it may be necessary to determine the distance across it. This might be true if you need to cut a tree for assistance in crossing, or if you have a rope and need to determine if it's long enough for a rope crossing. First, identify something that you can easily see on the other side of the obstacle. 2, at the edge of the obstacle, drive a stick into the ground directly in front of the object you identified. 3, take a compass bearing to that object, turn left or right, and walk a straight line until you achieve a 45-degree difference with the compass reading from the original bearing to the same object. You have now created a right angle. The distance in paces back to your stake will be the same as the distance across the obstacle. Whew. Now we have the PAL method, Positive Azimuth Uniform Layout Method. Interesting. I wonder how much more do we have left? So we only have a couple things left, but we don't have that much time. So all things are working out as they should. Using the Paul method will allow you to scout an unknown area and figure a straight line bearing back to camp without backtracking by reverse azimuth all the way. So this is definitely good for our purposes in adventuring, because I think they're often going to be trying to get back to a camp without necessarily, obviously without, I guess I should say in an unknown area. What is the Paul method, I wonder? This can come in very handy if you have covered quite a bit of distance. To use this method, you will need to set up a log page in your journal for notes, and you will have to record bearings and distance to each point along the way. The easy way to accomplish this and still get your scouting done is to carry a flag or a bandana that is highly visible, preferably one that is orange. Take an azimuth from your camp to a distant object. In your journal, record the azimuth and distance as you walk to it. Once you're there, place your flag on the object and continue scouting around the area, but never lose sight of the flag. When you're ready to move on, go back to the flag and take another reading to a distant object. Walk to it, record the bearing and paces again in your journal, place the flag on the object, and scout around. Continue this procedure until you're ready to return to camp. Draw a map in your book on a small scale using the points and distance you have recorded. Decide the scale based on any measuring device. For example, 1 inch equals 100 meters. Once you have drawn the map, and this could easily be done with sticks on the ground or with rocks, check your return azimuth from the last point to your camp and the distance. You should then be able to travel back in a straight line. If you have camped along a creek or water source, you have a ready-made backstop. Look at that. It's like we've put everything together. You got your reverse azimuths. You've got your taking bearings. You got your backstop. Bam, bam. Figuring daylight hours. There will be time when you want to know how much daylight you have left. It is prudent to set up camp at least 2 hours before sunset in the summer and 4 hours in the winter. Boy, that's a good thing to remind your players of. They always want to, like, how close into the evening can they walk? Well, prudence at least says 2 hours before sunset in the summer. To figure this without a watch, lift your hand up with your thumb tucked under and your fingers together. So I guess something like that. Place your hand under the sun. Every hand you can place between the sun and the horizon line going down equals 1 hour. Each finger represents 15 minutes. Oh, that's kind of cool. I'm down with that. I like it. That's definitely something you can have your rangery type use, because I always tell the players, like, they don't, oh, what happened? Hold on a second. Video's been lost. See if I can start it again. Okay. All right. Not sure what happened there. I'm back. I don't know why. I just decided my video camera was gone. Back to what we were talking about. So the figuring daylight hours, I thought that was kind of neat. Put your hand below the sun. Come back. Now, tips and tricks for successful navigation. Lured. Left, up, right down. Remember that while the Earth moves, let me just make sure. Hold on a minute. Whoops. The app says I'm back, but can everyone see? Oh, that's stupid. The app says I'm back, but can everyone see? Just verifying with chat, make sure that. So hopefully if I'm just speaking to myself, because even though the app says I'm back, no one else can see me. Wait. In the meantime, so hopefully I am visible and audible. Tips and tricks for successful blurred right down. Remember that while the Earth moves, okay, great. Gashin says I'm back. Left, right, up, down. Remember that while the Earth moves, it can make the objects in the sky move as well. Plant a stick in the ground and lie down on your back. Looking at the top of the stick like a gun sight, line this up with a star. After several minutes, the star will appear to have moved as the Earth has rotated. If the star moves left, you are facing north. If the star moves up, you are facing east. If the star moves right, you are facing south. If it moves down, you're facing west. The movement can also occur in combination. Right and down will be southwest, southwest. This method will work for any star except the North Star. Cool. So that's really neat. I never thought about that. So you put a stick, you lay down with a stick, you sight a star, and depending on how the star moves, you can see which way you're facing. Remember that the moon travels in roughly the same arc as the sun, and at night makes a great navigational aid. It rises in the east and sets in the west, with its zenith hours of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., being in a southerly direction when you're looking at the moon. All right, so let's see. Lie down. I'll plant a stick. Okay. Okay, so the moon, crescent moon. A crescent moon can be used to easily find a southern direction in the northern hemisphere. In an imaginary line drawn from the top crescent to the bottom of the crescent to the horizon will indicate a southerly direction. So if the moon's like here on the horizon, and then you were to go, ooh, that's south, okay. More things I had no idea. When traveling, it is always a good idea to look back at where you've been. On the return route, things will look more familiar if you've seen them from that angle before. Oh, that's a good idea too. So basically, you're moving forward, look back sometimes. Because, yeah, things do look different when you're traveling from another direction. When using any method of navigation to get general direction other than a compass, check at least 3 methods for verification. And that is it. We are at the end of the navigation chapter and basically at the end of the hour. So all is right with the world. What do you guys think about that? I thought it was really neat. A lot of kind of cool stuff in here. You know, some of it is because it's for modern tools for modern eyes, modern uses, is maybe not quite as useful for us, but you still get some ideas, I think, of how this stuff works. And certainly, I think some food for thought in terms of how you want to run things like getting lost and navigating. Maybe have a better idea of why it might take longer than your party might want to do some things. Maybe you've even thought, boy, I've been letting them do things too quickly. I want to slow that down a little bit. Or at least now, if they ask me why this takes 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever to do this thing, I now have more reasons to back them up. And I think it kind of hints at some things. If you wanted to mechanize some of these aspects, I think you could, in terms of taking bearings and doing all these kind of steps. Not necessarily that you want to mechanize them in details, but if you wanted to come up with some methods of they're trying to be on track, they're running into obstacles, these kind of things, you may want to figure out what a role might look like for that, or a skill if you want to, or something that he could do and give it some kind of heft in the game. And yeah, and this is all from a book that has nothing to do. This is not a gaming book at all. Obviously, this is all from Bushcraft 101 by Dave Canterbury, a field guide to the art of wilderness survival. It's part of the current Humble Bundle, Bushcraft / I think Survival Book Bundle. So you get a whole bunch of books. There's a couple of them I think are really good resources for gaming. This is one of them. I may look at the one about weather, which seems really interesting. We'll have to see. But yeah, some really good stuff in there. And you get a bunch of books for cheap, and you also get to help out some charity. So all in all, a great deal. On your way out, if you enjoy this, you give a thumbs up. That would be awesome. If you feel like subscribing and you're not already subscribed, subscribing would be awesome. And then you'll see my videos pop up when they come up, and they come up quite often between the streams and other video releases. Other than that, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody. And I will talk to you later.